Congresswoman Niki Tsongas, a Democrat from Massachusetts. She is on the Natural Resources Committee, which held hearings last week on the oil spill. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. I don't know, could you hear the prior conversation we just had?
I heard the tail end of it.
All right, well, that's where I want to start. Do you agree with the president in having a moratorium right now on deep water drills?
Absolutely. I can tell you in the testimony we heard on the Natural Resources Committee, both from the government side, Secretary Salazar, as well as BP on the second day, that there's plenty of responsibility to go around. And I think until we have a clear understanding of how this happened and how many other wells might be at risk, we really need to have a moratorium.
Well, one of the interesting things that just came out when I was talking to Mr. Hofmeister, he said that based upon what he knows, based upon the track record of deep water drilling, he actually thinks the decision to go forward wasn't aberrant. Sometimes these things happen. I'm not putting words into his mouth. Do you disagree with that? I mean, do you think that we should have stopped it even before? Should the permits not have been granted in the first place?
I think we had to better understand the risks that we were putting into place as we went forward. It seems to me that deep water drilling at this level is inherently risky. Common sense tells you that if there is an accident such as this one, the extraordinary challenges we will have in addressing it. And in testimony before the committee, we also heard that there were no contingency plans in place for dealing with a continuous spill, which is essentially what this is.
What John said, he's the former CEO of Shell, so he's certainly familiar with this. He said the contingency plan was, in fact, the blowout protector that didn't work here. And so my question to you is, can we create a regulatory structure that can assess these risks in a better way so that we can protect ourselves, or say that blowout protector simply won't work at this depth? How do we get regulators equipped to make that judgment call?
Well, we absolutely have to get regulators in place. I think even common sense would tell you that machinery fails. We can have confidence up to a point in it, and then we know that there are sometimes it goes wrong. And when it goes wrong, we have to have a plan in place to deal with it, especially given the extraordinary challenges at this depth of water. So I think you need to have a regulatory agency, and we know how corrupt and ineffective Minerals and Management Services was. Long time in the making, completely has to be reformed. So you have to have a regulatory agency that asks the hard questions, demands answers, has plans in place, and tasks the oil industry to come up with them if they themselves can't.
Congresswoman, let me sort of draw a metaphor here that some may or may not agree with, but it seems to me that MMS, the Minerals Management Service here, is playing the role of the SEC. The SEC failed in the markets, MMS failed in terms of the environment. We have regulatory agencies now under two administrations simply unable to figure out what the risks are in very complex dynamics in economic circumstances where somebody else is going to make a lot of money. How do we equip these regulatory agencies to be as sophisticated and put them in a position to stand up to a BP or an AIG or a Goldman Sachs? How do we get people into government who are that skilled? Because right now we're failing.
Well, it seems to me that leads to the ultimate question. If things become so complicated, so risky, so difficult to understand, then maybe we have to rethink the decision to go forward on a particular project. So whether it's deep water drilling or some of the complex financial instruments that we saw, if we can't understand them, if we can't appropriately regulate them, even putting in place very high standards and tremendous regulators, if we can't do that, then we have to step back and say, is this something, a path we should be pursuing, which leads us to, at this point in our history, the need to focus on clean energy technologies and beginning to wean ourselves from our dependence on fossil fuels.
I agree with everything you've just said. Time is short, but yes or no answer if you could. Carbon tax, do you think it would help? Yes or no? What do you think?
Well, I was proud to support the clean energy legislation that was before the House of Representatives. I am hopeful that the Senate will move ahead. It seems to me we have a moment in time that we need to take advantage of, because all of us are well aware of the perils of not really reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
We'll continue that conversation someday, I hope. I agree with you about that bill. Wonderful bill. I actually think a carbon tax might help also down the road. But anyway, Congresswoman Tsongas, thanks for joining us today.